The wagon wheels groaned against the scorched earth, each rotation stirring clouds of red dust that hung in the air like smoke from distant fires. 8-year-old Margaret Maggie Sullivan pressed her small face against the canvas covering, watching the endless Arizona desert stretch before them like a sea of rust and gold. It was the summer of 1858, and her family had been traveling west from Missouri for nearly 3 months, chasing dreams of fertile land and new beginnings. "Get back inside, Maggie," her mother called, her voice tight with the exhaustion that had settled into all their bones. "The sun's too fierce for a child." But Maggie couldn't tear her eyes away from the landscape. It was nothing like the green hills of Missouri. Here, the earth seemed to breathe fire, and skeletal remains of cattle dotted the trail like grim waypoints. Purple mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks lost in a haze that shimmered like water but promised only more heat. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, rode alongside the wagon on his bay mare, rifle across his lap, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The other families in their small caravan, the Johnsons, the Millers, and old Mr. Crawford with his 2 sons, maintained a similar vigilance. They'd heard stories in the last settlement, Apache raids, travelers found with arrows in their backs, entire wagon trains vanishing into the desert like mirages. "How much farther to Fort Buchanan, Pa?" Maggie asked when her father rode close. 2 days. Little bird, maybe 3. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The worry lines had deepened since they'd entered Apache territory a week ago. That night, they made camp in a cluster of rocks that offered some protection from the endless openness. The men took turns standing watch while the women prepared a meager meal of beans and hardtack. Maggie helped her mother, Elizabeth, tend to her baby brother Samuel, who fussed constantly in the heat. "Mama, why did we leave home?" Maggie asked, not for the first time. Elizabeth's hands stilled in their work. "For a better life, sweet girl. Your father says there's good land near the Gila River. We'll have a proper farm, not just that little patch in Missouri." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the star-drunk sky. Maggie had never seen so many stars. They seemed close enough to pluck like berries. She was drifting toward sleep when the horses began to whinny nervously. "Indians," the shout came from James Johnson. On watch. But it wasn't Apache warriors who emerged from the darkness. It was a group of bandits, faces covered with bandanas, guns glinting in the firelight. They swept into the camp like a desert storm, shouting demands for money, supplies, anything of value. "Nobody move," their leader barked, dismounting with practiced ease. "We'll take what we need and be gone." Chaos erupted. "Misses," Miller screamed. The men reached for weapons. In the confusion of gunfire and running figures, Maggie's mother pushed her behind a wagon wheel. "Stay down, stay quiet." But when one of the bandits grabbed her mother's hair, yanking her away from baby Samuel, Maggie couldn't stay hidden. She darted out, pounding her small fists against the man's legs. "Let her go! Let her go!" The bandit swatted her aside like a fly. Maggie tumbled into the sagebrush, the world spinning. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not back to the camp, but away, into the darkness, terror driving her small legs. Behind her, gunshots cracked like thunder. Her mother's scream pierced the night. She ran until her lungs burned, stumbling over rocks, tearing her dress on thorns. The sounds of violence faded, replaced by the vast silence of the desert. When she finally collapsed behind a large boulder, sobbing and gasping, she realized she was completely alone. The night sounds surrounded her, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through dry grass, the scuttle of unseen creatures. Every shadow could be a bandit, every sound a threat. Maggie hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Maggie's throat was parched, her lips cracked. She knew she should go back, find the camp, but which direction? The landscape looked the same in every direction, red earth, scattered rocks, thorny plants she didn't recognize. She walked, choosing directions at random, calling out weakly for her parents. The sun climbed higher, its heat pressing down like a physical weight. By midday, She could barely stand. That's when she saw them, figures on horseback, moving swiftly across the desert. Her heart leaped. "Papa, Papa!" She waved frantically, stumbling toward them. But as they drew closer, her relief turned to fresh terror. These weren't her father's people. These were Apache warriors, their faces painted with ochre and ash, their hair long and adorned with feathers. They rode bareback, moving as one with their horses. And when they saw her, they slowed, but didn't stop. Maggie froze, remembering every horrific story she'd heard about Indians and what they did to white settlers. But she was so thirsty, so tired, and there was nowhere to run. The lead rider, barely more than a boy himself, perhaps 16 or 17, studied her with dark, intelligent eyes. He said something in a language she didn't understand, then dismounted in one fluid motion. Maggie backed away, but her legs gave out, and she sat hard in the dust. The young Apache approached slowly. The way her father approached spooked horses. He held out a water skin. Maggie's need overcame her fear. She grabbed it with shaking hands and drank deeply, the warm water tasting better than anything she'd ever had. "Thank you," she whispered. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. He said something that sounded like Taza, pointing to himself. "Maggie," she responded, touching her chest. The other warriors conferred rapidly in their language. One gestured back the way they'd come, clearly arguing. But Taza seemed to be insisting on something, his voice calm but firm. Finally, he lifted Maggie onto his horse and swung up behind her. They rode for what felt like hours, though the sun hadn't moved far. Maggie dozed against Taza's chest, feeling strangely safe despite everything she'd been taught about Indians being savage killers. When they finally stopped, it was at a small Apache camp, not the massive village she'd imagined, but a temporary gathering of perhaps 20 people. The women and children stared at her with open curiosity. An older woman with kind eyes brought her food, some kind of flatbread and stewed meat. Maggie ate ravenously while Taza explained something to the others. She caught her name several times in his fluid speech. As night fell, they gave her a blanket and a place by the fire. The Apache children, losing their initial wariness, came closer. A girl about her age offered her a corn-husk doll. Maggie smiled tentatively, and soon they were playing together despite the language barrier. Taza sat nearby, tending to his weapons. In the firelight, Maggie could see he wasn't as frightening as she'd first thought. His face was angular and strong, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold old wisdom despite his youth. "My papa will find me," she told him, even though she knew he couldn't understand. "He'll come looking." Taza glanced at her, and something in his expression suggested he understood more than she thought. Later, as the camp settled for sleep, Maggie found herself sitting next to him again. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. She thought of her parents, wondering if they were looking at the same stars, if they were even alive. "When I grow up," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them, "I'll be your wife. Then I'll never be lost again." Taza turned to look at her, eyebrows raised. Then, understanding dawned on his face, and he laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise and amusement. It was a rich, warm sound that made others around the fire look over with smiles. He said something in Apache, shaking his head, still chuckling. Then, in heavily accented English that surprised her, he said, "You, small girl, go home, your people." "But you saved me," Maggie insisted with the stubborn certainty of childhood. "That means we're connected forever. My mama read me a story like that once." Taza's amusement softened to something else. He reached out and gently tugged one of her tangled blonde braids. "Brave little one," he said, the English words careful on his tongue. The next morning brought hoofbeats and familiar voices. "Maggie! Margaret Sullivan!" Her father's voice. Maggie jumped up, torn between relief and something else, a strange reluctance to leave this place where she'd felt oddly safe. The Apache men reached for weapons as 5 white men rode into view, but Taza held up a hand. calling out something that made them wait. Thomas Sullivan dismounted slowly, hands visible, his face gaunt with worry and lack of sleep. "Maggie, oh, thank God!" He started forward, then stopped. Seeing the Apache warriors, Taza stood, placing a gentle hand on Maggie's shoulder. In broken English mixed with gestures, he conveyed that they'd found her, cared for her, that she was unharmed. Thomas's relief warred with ingrained suspicion. But finally, he nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. He pulled out a leather pouch, offering coins, but Taza waved it away. As her father lifted her onto his horse, Maggie turned back to look at Taza one last time. "I meant what I said," she called out. "When I grow up, I'll come back." Taza smiled and raised his hand in farewell. As they rode away, Maggie could hear the Apache laughing again, not unkindly, but as people do when children say impossible things with complete conviction. The reunion with her mother was tearful. Elizabeth clutched her so tightly Maggie could hardly breathe, sobbing prayers of thanksgiving. The bandits had taken supplies and wounded Mr. Crawford, but no one had died. It was, her father said, a miracle. But as their depleted caravan continued toward Fort Buchanan, Maggie kept looking back toward the mountains where Taza's people lived. The logical part of her knew it had been a child's foolish promise, born of gratitude and the strange intimacy of shared danger. Yet something in Taza's dark eyes had imprinted itself on her heart, a kindness that contradicted every story she'd been told, a gentle strength that made her feel safe in the midst of terror. She didn't know then that she would carry that memory through all the long years to come, through her growing up in a New Mexico town, through all the proper young men her parents would parade before her. She didn't know that the child's promise, laughed away around an Apache campfire, would become the defining truth of her life. All she knew, riding in her father's arms through the burning desert, was that somewhere behind them rode a young Apache warrior named Taza, and that, somehow, impossibly, she would find her way back to him. The years passed like tumbleweeds across the desert, each one taking Maggie further from that night by the Apache fire, yet never dimming the memory. By 1871, Margaret Sullivan had grown into a young woman of 21. Her childhood wildness tamed into something more suitable for the small town of Silver Creek, New Mexico, where her family had finally settled. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains crimson. Those same mountains where, 13 years ago, an Apache boy had laughed at her childish promise. Her fingers traced patterns in the dust on the window pane, unconsciously drawing the shape of feathers and horses. "Margaret, stop your daydreaming," her mother called from downstairs. "Mr. Hartley will be here soon." William Hartley, the son of the territory's most prosperous rancher, with 10,000 head of cattle and political connections that reached all the way to Santa Fe. Her parents couldn't believe their good fortune when he'd begun courting their daughter 6 months ago. Maggie turned from the window and smoothed her blue calico dress, the one her mother insisted brought out her eyes. In the mirror, she saw a proper young lady, blonde hair pinned up, posture straight, expression serene. Nothing of the wild child who'd once run into the desert night remained, at least not on the surface. Dinner was a formal affair. William dominated the conversation, speaking of cattle prices and his plans to expand the ranch. He had a habit of talking with his mouth full and laughing too loudly at his own jokes. When he discussed the Indian problem, Maggie's fingers tightened on her fork. "The Army's finally taking a harder line," he said, sawing at his beef with enthusiasm. "About time, I say. Can't have savages raiding honest folks' cattle? Colonel Morrison says they'll have them all on reservations within the year." "Such a relief," Maggie's mother agreed. "To think, when we first came through this territory, they were everywhere. Poor Margaret even had an encounter with them as a child." William's eyes sharpened with interest. "That's so. You never mentioned that. Margaret." "It was nothing," Maggie said quietly. "They helped me when I was lost. They were kind." William snorted. "Kind? Apache? You were lucky they didn't scalp you on the spot." probably planning to ransom you back." He reached across the table to pat her hand possessively. "Don't worry, my dear. Once we're married, you'll have the protection of the Hartley name. No Apache would dare come near my property." That night, Maggie lay awake staring at the ceiling. Through her window, she could hear the distant sound of Mexican guitars from the cantina, mixing with the lonely whistle of the wind. She tried to imagine her future as Mrs. William Hartley, managing his household, bearing his children, hosting dinners for other ranchers' wives. The thought made her chest tight with panic. She rose and went to her drawer, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a single eagle feather, brown with white tips. She'd found it the morning they left the Apache camp, tucked into her blanket. For 13 years, she'd kept it hidden, a tangible reminder that her memory was real. The next morning brought news that set the town buzzing. A group of Apache warriors had been spotted near Dutchman's Creek, only 20 miles away. The men gathered in the street, cleaning rifles and talking of forming a militia, probably scouts for a larger war party. William declared, having ridden in early to check on Maggie, "I've sent word to Fort Stanton. They'll send troops." "Maybe they're just hunting," Maggie suggested. "The deer move through that area this time of year." William looked at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Defending them again?" "Really, Margaret, sometimes I wonder about you. A woman shouldn't concern herself with such matters anyway." That afternoon, while her mother visited Mrs. Patterson to plan the wedding, Maggie found herself in her father's study. The years had been kind to their fortunes. Thomas Sullivan now owned a successful dry goods store. Maps covered one wall, showing the territory in detail. She traced the route from Silver Creek to the mountains, calculating distances. The rational part of her knew it was foolishness. Taza would be in his 30s now, likely married with children of his own, if he was even still alive. The conflicts between the Apache and the Army had grown bloodier each year. "Planning our honeymoon trip?" William's voice from the doorway made her jump. "I didn't hear you come in," she said, stepping away from the maps. He crossed the room in 3 strides, backing her against the desk. "Your mother let me in, said you were in here." His hands gripped her waist. "Alone at last. William, please." "Come now, we're engaged." His breath smelled of tobacco and whiskey. "A kiss won't compromise your virtue." She turned her head, but he grabbed her chin, forcing her to face him. His lips pressed against hers, hard and demanding. When she pushed against his chest, he laughed. "Still playing the shy maiden? You'll learn to be more accommodating once we're married." He released her, straightening his vest. "I've spoken to your father. We'll move the wedding up to next month. No point in waiting." After he left, Maggie scrubbed at her mouth with the back of her hand. She could still feel the imprint of his fingers on her jaw. This was her future. William's rough hands, his possessive smile, his casual cruelty disguised as masculine authority. That evening, her parents announced the new wedding date at dinner. Samuel, now 13 and full of opinions, was the only one who noticed Maggie's distress. "You don't look happy, Mag," he said later, finding her on the back porch. "I'm fine, Sam." She ruffled his hair. This brother who'd been a baby in their mother's arms that terrible night. "No, you're not. You look like our old horse did when Pa put him in that small corral. Like you're looking for a way to jump the fence." Maggie pulled him close. "When did you get so wise? Is it because of him, Mr. Hartley?" Samuel made a face. "He's mean to his horses. Miguel at the stable told me. Beats them when they don't obey fast enough." A cold weight settled in Maggie's stomach. If William was cruel to animals, what would he be like with a wife who didn't obey fast enough? The next weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Fabric for her dress arrived from Santa Fe. The church was booked. Invitations went out to all the prominent families. Maggie moved through it all like a sleepwalker, smiling when expected, nodding at appropriate times. News from the territory grew worse. The Apache, led by leaders like Cochise and Victorio, were fighting the Army's attempts to force them onto reservations. Raids increased. Settlers were killed. The Army retaliated with brutal force. One night, Maggie overheard her father talking with other men in the parlor. "They say Victorio's band is moving north, trying to reach the mountains before winter." One man said, "Let them come." William's voice boomed. "I've got 50 men ready to ride. We'll finish what the army started. The government's offering bounties now," another added. $100 for a warrior's scalp. Maggie pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. She thought of Taza's kind eyes, his gentle hands offering water to a terrified child. Were bounty hunters pursuing him even now? 3 days before the wedding, Maggie made her decision. She waited until the house was asleep, then packed a small bag, practical clothes, her father's old pistol, what money she'd saved, and the eagle feather. She left a note on her pillow. "I'm sorry, I cannot live a lie. Please forgive me." She saddled her mare, Buttercup, a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, and rode out into the starlit night. The mountains loomed ahead, dark shapes against darker sky. Somewhere in those peaks were the Apache Taza's people, hunted and hounded, fighting for their freedom. As Silver Creek disappeared behind her, Maggie felt the proper young lady she'd pretended to be falling away like shed skin. She was once again the 8-year-old girl running into the desert, except this time, she was running toward something instead of away. The night wind sang of danger and uncertainty. She had no clear plan, no idea how to find one band of Apache in the vast wilderness. She only knew that she'd rather die seeking that long-ago kindness than live out her days in William Hartley's prison. By dawn, she'd covered 15 miles, following old trails her father had shown her on those maps. The rising sun revealed a changed landscape. Military patrols had left their mark everywhere. Burned wickiups, scattered belongings, graves marked with crosses and stones. She watered Buttercup at a stream and ate some of the jerky she'd packed, trying not to think about what her parents would do when they found her gone. Her mother would weep. Her father would rage. William would organize search parties, not out of love but wounded pride. As she prepared to mount again, she heard it, the distant rumble of hoofbeats. Many horses, moving fast. Maggie's heart hammered as she led Buttercup into a cluster of cottonwoods, praying whoever it was would pass by. But prayers, she was learning, were rarely answered the way one hoped in this hard country. The riders appeared on the ridge above, blue uniforms, rifles glinting in the morning sun. The army, and they were headed straight for her hiding spot. The cavalry patrol thundered past, so close Maggie could see the dust on their uniforms and smell the leather of their saddles. She pressed herself against Buttercup's side, hand over the mare's muzzle to keep her quiet. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded did she dare breathe again. She waited another hour before emerging, then continued north, keeping to the ravines and dried creek beds that offered cover. The sun climbed mercilessly, and she began to understand why travelers called this country hell with the fires burnt out. Her water was already half gone, and she'd barely begun. By afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising either blessed rain or deadly flash floods. Maggie pushed on, following game trails that wound higher into the foothills. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins, her back ached, and doubt crept in like the cold wind preceding the storm. What was she doing? A woman alone in Apache territory, with the army hunting one direction and outlaws haunting the other. She'd thrown away safety and family for a child's memory, a promise that meant nothing. The first fat raindrops fell as she crested a ridge. Below stretched a valley she didn't recognize, and beyond that, more mountains fading into purple distance. She was well and truly lost now, just as she'd been at 8 years old. Thunder cracked overhead. Buttercup danced nervously as the sky opened, releasing torrents of rain that turned the trail to mud. Maggie spotted an overhang of rock and urged her horse toward it, but the path gave way. They slid down the embankment in a cascade of stones and mud, Maggie fighting to stay mounted. They landed hard at the bottom. Buttercup struggled up, favoring her left foreleg. Maggie's heart sank. A lame horse in this country was a death sentence for both of them. She led the mare to a cluster of boulders that offered minimal shelter and examined the leg. Not broken, thank God, but badly strained. They wouldn't be traveling further today, or perhaps for several days. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving the air fresh and cool. Maggie gathered wet wood, trying to remember how her father made fire in damp conditions. After an hour of futile attempts, she gave up, settling for wringing out her clothes and sharing the last of her jerky with Buttercup. Night fell like a black curtain. Without fire, the cold seeped into her bones. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips raising goosebumps on her arms. She checked her father's pistol for the 10th time, though she'd only ever shot at targets, never living things. She must have dozed, because she woke to Buttercup's nervous whicker. The mare's ears were pinned back, nostrils flared. Maggie reached for the gun, squinting into the darkness. Well, what have we here?" The voice came from behind. Maggie spun, raising the pistol, but a hand knocked it away. 3 men materialized from the shadows, rough-looking characters with the unmistakable air of those who lived outside the law. "A lady, all alone," the leader said, teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "And a pretty one at that. Must be our lucky day, boys." "Please," Maggie said, hating how her voice shook. "I have money. Take it and leave me be." They laughed. "Oh, we'll take the money. But a woman like you, out here alone. You're either running from something or to something. Either way, you're worth more than what's in your purse." One grabbed her arms while another went through her bags. They found the money, her few supplies, and the eagle feather. "Apache token," the leader spat. "You an Indian lover, girl. That what you're doing out here?" "No, The man holding her squeezed harder, and she bit back a cry. "Boss," the third man called. "Horse is lame. Won't fetch much. Then we'll take what we can get." The leader's eyes traveled over Maggie in a way that made her skin crawl. Starting with her, terror gave her strength. She stomped hard on her captor's instep and twisted free, running blindly into the night. Behind her came shouts and curses. She scrambled up rocks, tore through brush, branches catching at her clothes and hair. A hand caught her skirt, yanking her down. She hit the ground hard, stars exploding across her vision. The leader loomed over her, no longer amused. "Stupid girl, now you've made me angry." A shot rang out. The man jerked, surprise replacing anger on his face before he toppled sideways. More shots followed, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. Maggie curled into a ball, hands over her head, as chaos erupted around her. Then, silence. She stayed frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Footsteps approached, careful and measured. "You hurt?" The voice spoke English with an accent she recognized. Though deeper than her memory, she looked up into a face painted for war, framed by long black hair. Not Taza. This warrior was older, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much death. "Can you stand?" he asked. Maggie nodded, accepting his offered hand. Around them, she could see other Apache warriors checking the bodies of the outlaws. Her rescuers moved with deadly efficiency, wasting no motion. "Why?" she managed. "Why did you help me?" The warrior studied her with those dark eyes. "You are the yellow-haired child, the one who made the promise." Her heart leaped. "You know Taza. You remember. All remember. Stories told many times." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Taza laughed for days. Said white child had heart of mountain cat. Fierce and foolish. Is he? Where is he?" The smile faded. "Come. Not safe here. Army patrols at dawn." They brought Buttercup, the warrior examining her leg with gentle expertise. "We'll heal," he pronounced. "But slow travel." Maggie found herself mounted behind the warrior on his horse, Buttercup being led by another. They rode in silence through the remaining darkness, taking paths she couldn't follow, doubling back and using creek beds to hide their tracks. Dawn revealed a hidden canyon, narrow entrance concealed by a fall of rocks. The camp beyond was small, perhaps 30 people, mostly women and children. They looked at Maggie with expressions ranging from suspicion to curiosity. An older woman approached, speaking rapidly in Apache. The warrior, who'd introduced himself as Kuruk, responded in the same language. gesturing toward Maggie. The woman's expression softened slightly. She is Siki, Taza's aunt. Kuruk explained. She says you are foolish to come here. Soldiers everywhere, hunting us like rabbits. I couldn't. Maggie struggled for words. I couldn't marry someone I didn't love. Couldn't live a lie. I remembered Taza's kindness, and I don't know what I thought. Siki said something else, and Kuruk translated. She says the heart wants what it wants, but wanting is not enough in these times. You bring danger to us. I'm sorry. I'll leave as soon as my horse can travel. And go where? Kuruk's tone was not unkind. Back to town? Outlaws own the trails now. Soldiers shoot first at anyone in these mountains. He shook his head. You stay until Taza returns. Then he decides. He's alive? Relief flooded through her. Where is he? Scouting. Army moves supplies through the pass. We must know when. How many? Kuruk's face hardened. They try to starve us out. No hunting allowed. No gathering. Want us to crawl to reservation like beaten dogs. Over the following days, Maggie found herself absorbed into the camp's rhythm. The women, initially wary, gradually accepted her presence. She helped where she could, gathering firewood, preparing meals, watching the children. Her hands, soft from years of town living, blistered and bled. But she didn't complain. Siki taught her to make tiswin, a traditional drink, and showed her which plants could heal Buttercup's leg. The children, bolder than their mothers, taught her words in Apache. She learned that this band was one of the last holdouts, refusing to surrender to reservation life. They promise food, blankets, safety. A young woman named Ayana told her in broken English, but those who go grow sick, spirit dies. Better to die free in mountains. Maggie thought of her comfortable life in Silver Creek. The feather beds, the full pantry, the safety of walls and laws. She'd given it up for this harsh existence, where every day brought new dangers. Yet watching these people maintain their dignity and culture despite everything, she felt more alive than she had in years. On her fourth night in camp, she woke to commotion. Warriors were returning, some wounded. Her heart raced as she searched the faces in the firelight. Then she saw him, taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, with new lines etched by sun and hardship. But the eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, holding depths of strength and sorrow. Taza stopped mid-stride when he saw her, his expression cycling through surprise, disbelief, and something else she couldn't name. Around them, the camp seemed to hold its breath. You came back, he said finally, his English clearer than she remembered. The child who made the promise. I'm not a child anymore, Maggie replied, standing straighter. No, he agreed, his gaze traveling over her torn dress, her work-roughened hands, her face thin from days of hardship. You are not? They stood there, 13 years collapsing into nothing, while the fire crackled and the night wind sang through the canyon walls. Everything she'd planned to say fled her mind. She'd crossed deserts and faced death to reach this moment, and now words failed her entirely. It was Taza who broke the silence, a familiar smile ghosting across his lips. Still fierce, still foolish. Some things do not change. The council fire burned low as the elders debated Maggie's presence in the camp. She sat outside the circle, understanding little of the rapid Apache words but feeling the weight of their scrutiny. Taza stood among them, his voice calm but firm, occasionally gesturing in her direction. Kuruk leaned close to translate fragments. Some say she brings soldiers' eyes. Others remember the child's promise. The old ways speak of signs and paths crossing. An elderly man with a face like weathered leather spoke at length, his words causing several warriors to nod. Siki added her voice, sharp and decisive. The debate continued until the moon reached its zenith. Finally, Taza approached her. You may stay, he said simply. But you must understand, we are hunted people. Every day brings danger. This is not the life you know. The life I knew was killing me slowly. Maggie replied. At least here, I feel alive. Something flickered in his eyes. Come. You need proper clothes, and those hands need medicine. He led her to Siki's wickiup, where the older woman examined Maggie's blistered palms with disapproving clicks of her tongue. As Siki applied a poultice of crushed plants, Taza watched from the entrance. "Why did you really come?" he asked quietly. Maggie winced as the medicine stung. "They wanted me to marry a man who collects Apache scalps for bounty money, who beats his horses and speaks of your people like animals to be exterminated." She met his gaze. I remembered a different truth, a kindness that asked nothing in return. "That was long ago. I am not the boy who gave water to a lost child. And I'm not that child, but the promise remains." Siki said something sharp, and Taza responded in Apache. The older woman shook her head but produced clothing, a deerskin dress, leggings, and moccasins. "She thinks you are touched by spirits." Taza translated. "To survive alone, find our camp, speak of promises from childhood. It is not natural." "Maybe it isn't," Maggie agreed. "But I'm here." The next days fell into a pattern. Mornings brought lessons in survival, which plants to gather, how to preserve meat, the art of moving silently through the brush. Ayana and the other women taught her to bead and work hide, their initial coolness warming to friendship. Taza kept his distance during daylight, busy with scouting parties and hunting, but in the evenings, he would appear at the edge of whatever group Maggie had joined, listening as she struggled with Apache words or laughed at the children's antics. "You learn quickly," he observed one night, after she'd managed a complete sentence in Apache. "I had a good first teacher," she reminded him, "even if he only taught me his name." "Taza is not my true name," he admitted. "It means gift in your language. My father called me that because I was born after many lost children. My Apache name is—" He spoke a word that sounded like wind through pine branches. "What does it mean?" "Stormcaller. The night I was born, thunder shook the mountains." He smiled slightly. "My mother said it was fitting. I brought storms wherever I went. You brought kindness to a scared little girl." Maggie countered. "That matters more than storms." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die to embers. Around them, the camp settled for sleep, but Maggie felt wide awake, aware of every breath, every small movement from the man beside her. "Your people will search," Taza said eventually. "The man you refused, he will not accept this insult quietly." "I know. I'm sorry if I've brought danger to your band. We live with danger. It is our shadow, our companion." He turned to study her. "But you could still go back. Say you were taken, held against your will. They would believe it." "Would you want me to go?" The question hung between them like a held breath. Taza's hand moved slightly, as if to reach for her, then stilled. "What I want does not matter. The path ahead offers only hardship. You deserve better than a hunted life." "I deserve the freedom to choose," Maggie said firmly. "And I choose this. I choose—" She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "Choose what?" His voice had gone low, dangerous in its gentleness. Before she could answer, shouts erupted from the sentries. Warriors grabbed weapons as the camp exploded into motion. Taza pulled Maggie behind a boulder as riders thundered into the canyon. But these weren't soldiers. Maggie's heart sank as she recognized the lead rider, William Hartley himself, accompanied by a dozen armed men. "Margaret Sullivan," William's voice boomed through the canyon. "I know you're here. These savages can't hide you forever." Taza's hand moved to his knife, but Maggie caught his wrist. "No, let me handle this." She stepped into view before he could stop her. "Hello, William?" His face contorted with rage and relief. "There you are. Good God. Margaret, what have they done to you?" He took in her Apache dress, her sunburned face, her loose hair. "Don't worry. We'll get you home. Doc Morrison will examine you. Make sure you're unharmed. I am unharmed, and I'm not going back." "Don't be ridiculous. You're clearly not thinking straight. These heathens have corrupted your mind." He dismounted, striding toward her. "Come now. No more foolishness." "I said no, William." He grabbed her arm roughly. "You've humiliated me enough, woman. Half the territory thinks I can't control my own bride. You'll come back. We'll be married quietly, and we'll never speak of this shame again." An arrow whistled past William's ear, embedding in a tree trunk. He released Maggie, spinning to find Apache warriors emerging from cover, weapons drawn. Taza stepped forward. Another arrow knocked. "The woman said no. In our culture, we respect such words." William's men raised their rifles, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. The rancher's face flushed purple. "You dare threaten white men? I'll have the army burn this canyon to ash." "You are welcome to try," Taza replied calmly. "Many have. We are still here. Margaret?" William tried again, his tone wheedling now. "Think of your parents. Your mother weeps daily. Your father's business suffers from the scandal. Come home, for their sake, if not mine." Maggie felt the words like physical blows. Her poor parents. They didn't deserve this pain. But then she thought of a lifetime shackled to this man, bearing his children, enduring his temper. "Tell them I love them," she said quietly. "Tell them I'm sorry, but I cannot live their dream for me. You'd choose these animals over your own kind." William's mask of concern cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. "You're ruined. You know that? No decent man will have you after this. You'll die out here, unmourned and forgotten. Better to die free than live in your cage." Maggie shot back. William's hand moved toward his gun, but found 3 Apache arrows aimed at his heart. He slowly raised both hands. "This isn't over," he snarled. "The army will come. They'll slaughter every last one of these savages, and they'll drag you back in chains if necessary. You're still my property by law." "I am no man's property," Maggie said, moving to stand beside Taza. "And if you bring soldiers here, you'll find only empty mountains. These people know how to vanish like smoke." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, William backed toward his horse. 6 weeks, Margaret. I'll give you 6 weeks to come to your senses. After that—" He left the threat hanging as he mounted. The riders departed in a cloud of dust and curses. As the sound faded, Maggie's knees buckled. Taza caught her, his arm strong around her waist. "You were brave," he murmured. "I was terrified," she corrected, leaning into his warmth. "Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite fear." His hand brushed her cheek, and she realized she was crying. "He's right, though. The army will come." "I've endangered everyone." "Let them come," said Kuruk, approaching with other warriors. "We have evaded them before." But Siki's expression was grave. "Too many times we run. Too many places forbidden to us. Where do we go when all mountains have soldiers' boots?" The council met again that night. Voices raised in argument. Some wanted to flee immediately, others to fight. Still others spoke of finally surrendering to reservation life. Maggie sat with the women, guilt gnawing at her. These people had survived through wisdom and courage, and she'd brought the very danger they'd fought to avoid. "You think too loud," Ayana observed. "Your face shows all feelings. I should leave. Draw William and his men away." "And go where? That man has snake eyes. He will not stop until he owns you." Ayana touched Maggie's hand. "Besides, you think Taza would allow it?" As if summoned. Taza appeared from the council circle. His expression was unreadable as he beckoned to Maggie. "Walk with me," he said. They climbed to a ledge overlooking the canyon, where stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds. The night wind carried the scent of sage and pine. "We leave at dawn," Taza said. "The band will split. Families with children go to the reservation. It breaks my heart. But winter comes, and little ones need food and shelter. The warriors—" He paused. "We go deeper into the mountains, continue to fight, continue to be free. And me," he turned to face her fully, moonlight silvering his features. "That is your choice, always your choice. But know this, if you stay, it is not for a season or until danger passes. If you stay, it is as one of us, completely." "I made that choice when I left Silver Creek," Maggie said. "I made it 13 years ago." even if I didn't understand then. You speak of the promise again. His voice held something new, a vulnerability she'd never heard before. Do you know what you truly promised that night? To be your wife, she said simply. A child's words, but my heart meant them. It still does. Taza stepped closer, his hand cupping her face. Among my people, marriage is not just two hearts joining, it is two spirits becoming one path. To marry me is to marry this life, the running, the hiding, the fighting, to never know a solid roof or a soft bed, to watch children go hungry and elders die far from sacred lands. I've had solid roofs and soft beds, Maggie whispered. They felt like burial shrouds. This life, your life, it's hard and dangerous and uncertain, but it's real, it's free, and it's with you. He kissed her then, under the vast desert stars, and it was nothing like William's bruising possession. It was gentle as morning light, fierce as thunderstorms, deep as the canyons that sheltered them. When they finally parted, Maggie felt remade, reborn. My fierce one, Taza murmured against her hair, my gift from the spirits. You bring such joy and such worry to my heart. No more worry than you bring to mine. She replied, Stormcaller. They stood together on the ledge, watching the wheel of stars turn overhead, both knowing that dawn would bring new dangers, new flights into the unknown. But for this moment, they had each other, and the promise that had waited 13 years to be fulfilled. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of thunder that wasn't thunder, the rhythmic beat of many horses approaching from the south. The scouts had given warning, but barely enough. The army had moved faster than expected, and now dust clouds on the horizon announced their arrival. Move! Everyone move! Taza's voice cut through the chaos as families scrambled to gather essentials. The separation was heartbreaking, mothers embracing grown sons who would stay to fight, elderly grandparents choosing the uncertain mercy of soldiers over flight into the harsh mountains. Maggie helped Siki pack medicines and sacred items. The older woman pressed a small leather pouch into Maggie's hands. For wounds, she said in broken English. And for... She made a gesture over her belly. When time comes. Before Maggie could ask what she meant, the first rifle shots echoed through the canyon. The army had found them. This way! Karuk led a group toward a hidden trail while warriors took positions to slow the soldiers. Maggie found herself swept along with the fighters rather than the families heading to surrender. Taza appeared at her side, pressing her father's pistol into her hands. Stay close, he commanded. Do not be taken alive. The words chilled her, but she understood. Stories of what soldiers did to captured Apache women were well known. She checked the weapon's load and nodded. They climbed steep paths known only to the Apache, while below, the canyon erupted in gunfire. The rearguard warriors bought precious time with their lives. Maggie looked back once to see smoke rising from their abandoned camp. Everything they couldn't carry put to torch rather than left for enemies. By midday, they'd gained the high country, but the army was persistent. Colonel Morrison had brought Apache scouts, turncoats. Karuk spat. Who could follow trails the white soldiers would miss? There. Taza pointed to a line of riders far below. They track us still. The band, now reduced to perhaps 20 warriors and a handful of women who refused surrender, pushed deeper into the mountains. They moved like ghosts, using every trick of terrain and weather, but always the blue coats followed. On the third day, exhaustion and hunger began taking their toll. They'd had no time to hunt, surviving on pine nuts and what little dried meat they'd saved. Water sources were scarce at this elevation, and several horses had gone lame on the rocky trails. We cannot keep running, an older warrior named Naichi argued during a brief rest. Better to turn and fight, die with honor, die accomplishing nothing. Taza countered, our deaths serve no purpose if the young ones have no future. What future? Naichi gestured bitterly at the barren peaks around them. They pen our families like cattle. They take our children to white schools, cut their hair, beat them for speaking our words. Perhaps the woman was right. We should have killed her when she came. Maggie felt the accusation like a physical blow, but before she could speak, Taza stepped between them. The woman has proven herself. She chose our path with open eyes. Direct your anger at those who deserve it. That night, huddled in a shallow cave as snow began to fall, Maggie pressed against Taza's warmth. Around them, others shared what little heat they could generate. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Naichi is right. My presence brought this faster. It would have come regardless." Taza replied, "The white man's hunger for land knows no satisfaction. At least now I face it with you beside me." A commotion at the cave entrance brought everyone alert. One of the scouts stumbled in, blood streaming from a shoulder wound. "Soldiers," he gasped. "Found our trail, coming with first light." There was no debate this time. They'd run as far as geography allowed. Behind them lay the army. Ahead, only sheer cliffs and winter storms. "We make our stand here," Taza announced. "Let them remember that Apache warriors do not yield easily." Through the night they prepared. Weapons were checked, prayers offered to the spirits, faces painted for war. Maggie helped tend the wounded scout, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "You could still go to them," Ayana suggested quietly. "Say you were our prisoner. They might believe." "No." Maggie's voice was firm. "I stand where I choose to stand." Dawn broke gray and bitter cold. The warriors took positions among the rocks, while the few non-combatants sheltered in the cave. Maggie crouched beside Taza, her father's pistol ready. "When I was small," Taza said suddenly, "my grandmother told me I would love a woman from the Sunrise Lands. I thought she meant the Pueblo or Comanche. I never imagined." He touched Maggie's face. "You are my sunrise, bringing light to dark days. Don't talk like we're already dead." Maggie said fiercely, "We're going to survive this." "Perhaps, but if the spirits call me today, know that these moons with you were worth all the years before." The attack came with shocking swiftness. Blue coats swarmed up the mountainside. Using covering fire to advance, the Apache fought with desperate skill, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Maggie fired carefully, making each shot count. Beside her, Taza's bow sang its deadly song. For a time, they held the soldiers back, the narrow approach working in their favor. Then everything changed. A rifle bullet caught Karuk in the chest, spinning him around. Another warrior fell, then another. The circle of defenders shrank. "Fall back to the cave," Taza ordered. They retreated step by step, but soldiers had flanked them. Gunfire came from multiple directions now. In the chaos, Maggie saw a young soldier, barely older than her brother Samuel, aiming at Taza's back. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, her shot taking the soldier in the shoulder, but the movement exposed her. Pain exploded through her side as a bullet found its mark. "Maggie!" Taza caught her as she fell, his face a mask of anguish. "Just grazed." She lied, pressing her hand to the wet warmth spreading across her ribs. He half carried, half dragged her to the cave, where Ayana immediately began cutting away cloth to examine the wound. Outside, the gunfire was slowing. Too many warriors had fallen. "Surrender," a voice called in English. "You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and you'll be treated fairly." Bitter laughter met this promise. Everyone knew the army's definition of fair treatment. "We need to bind this tight," Ayana muttered, working on Maggie's wound. "Stop the bleeding." Taza looked torn between staying with Maggie and returning to the fight. She gripped his hand. "Go," she said. "Your people need you." "You are my people now." But he kissed her forehead and moved back to the cave entrance where the last warriors crouched. Time blurred. Maggie drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of shots, shouts, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Then, strangely, silence. "They're coming," someone said. Through her haze, Maggie saw blue uniforms filling the cave mouth. The surviving Apache warriors stood proudly despite their wounds. Weapons cast aside but heads unbowed. A familiar figure pushed through the soldiers. William Hartley. His face flushed with triumph and something darker. "There she is," he said. "My runaway bride. Look at you now, bleeding out for these savages. Not Your bride, Maggie managed. Never was. William's face contorted. He raised his pistol, aiming at Taza. This one led them. Colonel Morrison wants examples made. No! Maggie tried to rise, but the pain dropped her back. Please, William, if you ever felt anything for me. Felt? William laughed harshly. You cost me reputation, money, respect, but I'm generous. Watch your savage die, then I'll take you back. Doc Morrison will patch you up, and we'll be married within the week. You'll spend the rest of your life making this up to me. Taza stepped forward, placing himself between William's gun and the other survivors. Let them go. Your fight is with me. Noble to the end. How touching. William cocked the hammer. The shot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space, but it was William who staggered, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him, Colonel Morrison lowered his smoking weapon. Fool civilian, the colonel said coldly. I gave orders for capture, not execution. He looked at the wounded Apache, at Maggie bleeding on the cave floor. Secure the prisoners. Get medical attention for anyone who can be saved. As soldiers moved to follow orders, Morrison approached Maggie. Miss Sullivan, your father sent word. He wants you home safe. These people, Maggie fought to stay conscious. They're not what you think. They just want to be free. That's not for me to decide, miss, but I'll see they're treated fairly. You have my word. The world faded to black. Maggie's last sight was Taza's face, his dark eyes holding hers, promising without words that this wasn't the end. She woke days later in a military hospital, bandages tight around her ribs. Her mother sat beside the bed, aged 10 years in as many weeks. Oh, Margaret, Elizabeth Sullivan wept. We thought we'd lost you. The others, Maggie croaked. The Apache, what happened to them? Her mother's face closed off. They've been sent to the reservation. It's done. Margaret, you're safe now. You can forget this whole terrible adventure. But Maggie knew she would never forget. Somewhere beyond these walls, Taza lived. She had to believe that. And somehow, someday, she would find her way back to him. The promise still held, even if she had to wait another lifetime to keep it. Recovery was slow and painful. For weeks, Maggie drifted between fever dreams and laudanum-hazed consciousness. In her delirium, she called for Taza, speaking Apache words that horrified her mother. The doctor, a kind man named Patterson, assured the family that confusion was normal after such trauma. She'll forget, he said confidently. Once she's well, surrounded by civilized comforts again, this wild phase will seem like a bad dream. But as Maggie's body healed, her spirit remained restless. She stared out the window at the distant mountains, wondering which reservation held Taza, whether he was even alive. Her father had used his influence to prevent charges being filed against her, but information about the Apache prisoners was harder to obtain. They're at San Carlos, Samuel finally told her, sneaking into her room one evening. I heard Pa talking with Colonel Morrison. About 300 Apache were moved there last month. San Carlos. The name was synonymous with misery among the Apache. A desolate place of bad water and worse land, where different bands were forced together like oil and water, but it was something, a place to start. Sam, she gripped his hand. I need your help. Her brother's face showed understanding beyond his years. You're going back to him, aren't you? That Apache who protected you. His name is Taza, and yes, when I'm strong enough. Ma and Pa will never allow it. They're already talking about sending you to Aunt Catherine in Boston. They think a change of scenery will help you forget. Then I'll have to leave before they can. Maggie studied her brother's face. Will you help me? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. You were happy there. Really happy. I could see it in your letters, the ones Ma burned. You deserve that happiness, even if I don't understand it. Over the following weeks, as Maggie regained her strength, the siblings planned. Samuel smuggled maps, gathered information about San Carlos, saved money from his job at their father's store. Maggie played the part of the recovering daughter, speaking less of her time with the Apache. pretending interest in Boston and her aunt's society connections. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A supply contractor named Dobson arrived in town, seeking goods for the reservation trade. Over dinner, he regaled the family with stories of his dealings at San Carlos. "Miserable place," he said around a mouthful of beef. "Hot as Hades in summer, cold as a witch's heart in winter. The Apache just sit there, waiting for government handouts. Broken people. The lot of them." "Do you know a warrior named Taza?" Maggie asked carefully. "He helped me when I was with them. I'd like to send thanks, perhaps through the agency." Dobson's eyes sharpened with interest. "Taza? Yes, I know him. Troublemaker, that one. Refuses to take an English name. Won't send the children to school. The agents threatened to cut his rations more than once." "He has children?" Maggie's heart clenched. "Not yet, far as I know. But he looks after his sister's orphans since she died of the fever last month. Takes food from his own mouth to feed them." Dobson leaned back. Stubborn fool. If he'd just cooperate, life would be easier for everyone. That night, Maggie made her decision. She couldn't wait for perfect timing or complete healing. Every day that passed was another day Taza suffered in that horrible place. Samuel woke her before dawn. "Dobson's wagon train leaves in an hour. I've hidden supplies in the last wagon, clothes, food, medicine from Doc Patterson's cabinet. And this." He pressed a leather pouch into her hands. "My savings. It's not much, but it might help." "Sam, I can't." "Yes, you can. Just promise to write when you're safe. Let me know you're happy." They embraced, both knowing it might be years before they saw each other again. Then Maggie slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness, her ribs protesting but her spirit soaring. She hid among the supply wagons until they were well clear of town, then presented herself to a shocked Dobson. "Miss Sullivan, what in blazes? I'm going to San Carlos," she said firmly. "I'll work my passage. I can cook, tend wounds, whatever you need. Just take me with you." Dobson sputtered and threatened to turn back, but they were already a day out, and time was money in his business. Finally, he agreed. She could come as far as the agency, but he took no responsibility for her after that. The journey was grueling. Summer heat baked the desert, and monsoon rains turned roads to mud. Maggie earned her place, cooking for the teamsters, mending torn harnesses, even taking a turn at the reins when a driver fell ill. At night, around the campfires, she heard stories that made her blood burn. The corruption at the agencies, where supplies meant for Apache families lined white men's pockets. The punishment for any resistance cut rations, imprisonment, children stolen away to boarding schools. "Why do you care so much?" one teamster asked. "They're just Indians. They're people," Maggie replied. "People who saved my life. People who deserve better than slow starvation." San Carlos appeared like a vision from hell. Flat, barren land stretched to the horizon, broken only by the sluggish Gila River. The Apache camps clustered near the agency buildings, a collection of brush shelters and canvas tents that looked like they'd blow away in a strong wind. Dobson led her off at the agency with a gruff warning. "Whatever fool notion brought you here, forget it. This place breaks everyone, white and Apache alike." The agent, a thin man named Clum, was even less welcoming. "Miss Sullivan, your father telegraphed about your situation. I'm to send you home on the next available transport." "I'm not going home," Maggie said. "I'm here to help. I can teach, nurse the sick, anything useful." "You're here for that Apache, Taza?" Clum's smile was knowing and unpleasant. "Don't deny it, but you should know. He wants nothing to do with whites now. Blames your kind for his sister's death, for the children's suffering. You'd best forget him." But Maggie hadn't come this far to be deterred by a bitter agent. She found lodging with the agency teacher, a kind widow named Mrs. Foster, who was sympathetic to her situation. "Love makes us do strange things, Mrs. Foster said. But be careful. The Apache here are wounded souls. They don't trust easily, especially not white women who remind them of what they've lost." The next morning, Maggie ventured into the Apache camps, The conditions were worse than she'd imagined. Children with swollen bellies from malnutrition, elderly people coughing from the dust that never settled, warriors reduced to standing in line for meager rations, their pride as tattered as their clothes. She found Taza's shelter by asking children, who giggled at her clumsy Apache. He was sitting outside, teaching a young boy to fletch arrows, a skill useless here but maintained out of stubborn tradition. "Taza!" He looked up, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw surprise, joy, pain, then his face hardened. "Why are you here?" His English was harsh, clipped. "I promised, when I grow up, I'll be your wife. I'm here to keep that promise. Look around." He gestured at the desolate camp. "This is not the mountains. There is no freedom here, no future, only slow death. Then we'll face it together." "No." He stood, towering over her. "You don't understand. My sister died because the agent withheld medicine, punishing me for speaking against him. These children starve because I won't crawl on my belly like a beaten dog. I am poison here. I poison everything I touch." The little boy tugged at Taza's leg, asking something in Apache. Taza's face softened as he answered, but when he looked back at Maggie, the walls were up again. "Go home, Margaret Sullivan. Find a white man, have white children, live a white life. Forget the foolish promises of childhood." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the dust. But Maggie had learned stubbornness from the Apache themselves. She wouldn't give up so easily. She threw herself into work at the camps. Using the medical supplies Samuel had stolen, she treated infected wounds, fever, the constant dysentery that plagued the reservation. She helped Mrs. Foster expand the school, teaching letters and numbers, but also fighting for the right to preserve Apache language and stories. Slowly, warily, the people began to accept her. Ayanna, who had survived the cave battle, became her ally. "He watches you," Ayanna reported. "When you teach the children, when you stand up to the agent, he thinks no one notices. But we all see." "Then why won't he speak to me?" "Because he loves you. Because he fears his love will destroy you as it destroyed everything else he's cherished." Ayanna touched Maggie's hand. "Be patient. The heart cannot stay closed forever." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the children Taza cared for, a girl named Singing Bird, fell gravely ill. The agency doctor refused to come, claiming he had no medicine to waste on hopeless cases. Maggie stormed into Clum's office. "That child will die without treatment. How can you sit there and allow it?" "Resources are limited," Clum replied coldly. "We must prioritize those who show promise of civilizing. Taza's brats will only grow up to be troublemakers like him." Maggie slapped him. The sound echoed in the small office. Clum's face went white, then red. "You've just assaulted a federal agent. I could have you arrested." "Do it," Maggie challenged. "I'll tell everyone who'll listen about the supplies you sell instead of distribute, about the medicine locked in your storehouse while children die." They stared at each other. Finally, Clum looked away. "Take what medicine you need, but you're no longer welcome at this agency. Find somewhere else to spread your Indian-loving ways." Maggie grabbed what she could and ran to Taza's shelter. Without words, she began treating Singing Bird, using every skill the Apache women had taught her. Taza watched from the doorway, his face unreadable. Through the night, they fought for the child's life. When her fever finally broke near dawn, Taza spoke for the first time in weeks. "You stayed? I'll always stay," Maggie replied simply. He crossed the shelter and pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking. "My stubborn one, my fierce heart, I tried to send you away for your own good." "I determine my own good," she said against his chest. "And my good is with you, here in this terrible place, or wherever the wind takes us. That's my choice." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home after a long, bitter journey. Around them, the reservation began to stir with morning sounds, children crying, dogs barking, the eternal wind raising dust. It was nothing like the mountain paradise where they'd first declared their love, but they were together, And that was enough for now. Life on the reservation ground on through the suffocating summer, despite Agent Clum's hostility. Maggie continued her work among the Apache, moving into a brush shelter near Taza's camp. The other whites at the agency shunned her, but she found family among the people who had once seemed so foreign. Then came the night that changed everything. Maggie woke to the thunder of hoofbeats and harsh voices shouting commands. Through the shelter's opening, she saw soldiers surrounding the Apache camps, rifles gleaming in the torchlight. By order of the War Department, all Apache males over 16 are to be detained for questioning regarding recent raids on settler homesteads. Taza was already moving, pushing Singing Bird and her brother into Maggie's arms. Hide them. Whatever happens, keep them safe. You didn't raid anyone. That doesn't matter. His face was grim. They need someone to blame. Soldiers began pulling men from their shelters, women wailing as husbands and sons were bound with ropes like cattle. Taza stepped out before they could drag him, holding his head high as they tied his hands. Taza! Maggie started forward, but Ayanna held her back. No, you'll only make it worse. They're looking for excuses to shoot. The roundup was efficient and brutal. Over 100 Apache men were herded into wagons, including boys who looked barely adolescent. Captain Morrison, the same officer who had captured them in the mountains, oversaw the operation with cold precision. Maggie couldn't stay silent. She approached him, keeping her voice steady. Captain, you know Taza. He's been here all summer, caring for orphaned children. He couldn't have raided anyone. Morrison's expression softened slightly. He remembered her from the cave, wounded and delirious. Miss Sullivan, I'm following orders. There have been attacks. Apache arrows found at the scenes. The settlers demand justice. Apache arrows that anyone could make or steal. This is collective punishment for crimes you can't prove they committed. Perhaps, but that's for a military tribunal to decide. He paused, then added quietly, If you care for him, gather evidence of his innocence. The trial is in 2 weeks at Fort Grant. As the wagons rolled away in clouds of dust, the camps erupted in grief. Women keened for their men. Children cried for their fathers, and the elderly spoke of times when the Apache could defend themselves instead of being herded like sheep. Maggie held Taza's orphaned children as they sobbed, her own tears falling silently. But grief wouldn't save him. Action would. We need witnesses, she told Ayanna and the other women. People who can testify that our men were here during the raids. We need to find out who really did this. Mrs. Foster, despite the risk to her position, helped gather affidavits from agency employees who could verify the Apache men's presence during the time of the attacks. Even some of the soldiers, uncomfortable with arresting men they'd seen daily at ration distributions, quietly provided statements. But it was Samuel, arriving unexpectedly with urgent news, who provided the crucial information. Maggie? He embraced her, shocked at how thin she'd become. I came as soon as I heard about the arrests. You need to know, William Hartley didn't die from Colonel Morrison's shot. What? Maggie stared at her brother. But I saw. He survived, scarred but breathing, and he's been hiring men. Meg, rough men who brag in saloons about their Apache raids. I think he's behind this, trying to destroy Taza and force you home. The pieces clicked into place. William's obsession, his resources, his hatred of the Apache who had stolen his bride. Of course he would orchestrate this. Can you prove it? I have a name, Jake Flowers, one of Hartley's hired guns. He's been drunk at Murphy's saloon for 3 days, boasting about fooling the army with planted evidence. Time was running out. The trial was in 5 days, and Fort Grant was a 2-day ride. Maggie made a desperate decision. I need to find this Jake Flowers. Make him confess. Sam, can you get me there? Maggie, no. These are dangerous men, and Taza will hang if we do nothing. She gripped her brother's shoulders. Please, Sam. I've lost too much already. I can't lose him too. They rode hard, switching horses at way stations, pushing through exhaustion. Murphy's saloon squatted at a crossroads like a cancerous growth, the kind of place where law was a suggestion and violence a certainty. Jake Flowers wasn't hard to find, a big man with cruel eyes. holding court at a corner table. Maggie's appearance caused a stir. Decent women didn't enter such establishments. Well, well, Flowers drawled, recognizing her. The Apache lover herself. Hartley said you might show up eventually. You framed innocent men, Maggie said steadily. You're going to confess. Laughter rippled through the saloon. Flowers stood, hand hovering near his pistol. Little girl, you're in the wrong place making the wrong demands. Am I? Maggie had learned more than medicine from the Apache. She'd learned patience, strategy, and when to strike. Because I have something you need. She produced a leather pouch, her mother's jewelry, grabbed in desperation before leaving home again. Diamond earrings caught the lamplight. Enough here to start fresh in California, far from Hartley and his schemes. All you have to do is write out the truth and sign it. Greed warred with caution in Flowers' eyes. But before he could decide, the saloon door slammed open. William Hartley stood silhouetted against the night, his once handsome face twisted by scars. Margaret, I heard you were looking for my employee. His smile was a grotesque thing. Did you really think I'd let you go? You cost me everything, my reputation, my pride, my face. You owe me a life for that. I owe you nothing, Maggie replied, though fear crawled up her spine. The saloon patrons had backed away, sensing violence. Take her, William ordered Flowers. Bring her to the ranch. We'll be married tonight, willing or not. Then I'll deal with her Apache buck myself. Flowers hesitated. The jewelry was tempting, but William paid his salary. That moment of hesitation saved Maggie's life. Samuel burst through the back door, accompanied by Captain Morrison and a squad of soldiers. The captain looked older, wearier, but his voice carried absolute authority. William Hartley, you're under arrest for conspiracy, false evidence, and inciting violence against federal wards. You can't prove anything, William snarled. Actually, we can. Morrison held up a telegram. Your former associate, Mr. Dobson, has been quite talkative about your schemes. Seems his conscience finally troubled him. The arrest was swift. Flowers, seeing which way the wind blew, suddenly became eager to confess everything for a reduced sentence. Within an hour, Maggie had a signed statement detailing the false raids, the planted evidence, all of it. Why? She asked Morrison as they prepared to ride for Fort Grant. Why help now? The captain looked uncomfortable. I've seen too much injustice disguised as law. Miss Sullivan, your Apache, Taza, he could have killed me in that cave. Instead, he protected those weaker than himself. That stays with a man. They rode through the night again, racing the clock. Dawn was breaking as they thundered into Fort Grant, just as the tribunal was convening. The trial had been intended as a formality. Apache men accused meant Apache men guilty, but Maggie's evidence, Morrison's testimony, and Flowers' confession changed everything. One by one, the accused were released, though not without bitter words from the tribunal judges about Apache sympathizers and the corrupting influence of certain white women. Maggie waited outside as the men emerged, blinking in the sunlight. Some walked proud, others stumbled from their ordeal. Then Taza appeared, thinner but unbroken. They met in the dusty courtyard, surrounded by soldiers and Apache families. No words were needed. Taza pulled her into his arms, and she felt the trembling he wouldn't show the world. My fierce one, he murmured into her hair, still saving me. We save each other, she corrected. That's what partnership means. Agent Clum was dismissed following an investigation sparked by the scandal. His replacement, a younger man named Crawford, seemed genuinely interested in improving conditions. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. That evening, as Apache families reunited around their fires, Maggie sat with Taza watching the children play. They'd survived another storm, but she knew more would come. The reservation was still a prison, the future still uncertain. What now? She asked. Taza was quiet for a long moment. Some speak of Geronimo in Mexico, still free, still fighting. Others talk of learning the white man's law, fighting with words instead of weapons. He looked at her. What do you think? I think we decide together, Maggie said firmly. Whatever path we choose, we walk it as one. He smiled then, the expression transforming his war-hardened features. The child who promised to be my wife has become a woman of wisdom. The warrior who laughed at that child has become a man worth every promise, she replied, as stars emerged in the desert sky. They held each other, two souls who had defied everything, race, culture, law itself, to be together. The future remained uncertain, but their bond was sure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight they had each other, and that was victory enough. The autumn winds carried change to San Carlos. Word came that Geronimo had finally surrendered in Mexico, ending the last free Apache resistance. Some mourned, others felt relief. The wars were truly over now, for better or worse. Taza stood on a ridge overlooking the reservation, Maggie beside him, below. Their people went about the daily struggle of survival in this hard place. But something was different now. Children attended the school where both Apache and English were taught. Young men learned trades beyond warfare, and small gardens grew where the soil allowed. My father would not recognize this world, Taza said quietly. Warriors becoming farmers, children speaking the enemy's tongue. But they also speak Apache, Maggie reminded him. They know their stories, their traditions. That's what we fought to preserve. Agent Crawford had proven true to his word, implementing reforms that made life bearable, if not easy. The corrupt supply system was cleaned up, medicine was actually distributed, and the Apache were consulted about their own governance. It wasn't freedom, but it was dignity. Margaret Sullivan and Taza of the Chiricahua. Crawford called from below. Could you come to the agency office? They found Crawford with unexpected visitors. Maggie's parents, looking older and worn by years of worry. Her mother's cry of joy was cut short by uncertainty as she took in her daughter's Apache dress, her sun-darkened skin, the natural way she stood beside Taza. Margaret, her father said carefully, we've come to understand. Samuel told us everything, how you saved those men, how you've helped here. And we want you to come home, her mother added quickly. Both of you. We have room, and Thomas could use help at the store. Mama, Maggie said gently, this is my home. These are my people now. Elizabeth Sullivan's face crumpled. But you're our daughter, our only daughter. Taza stepped forward with the courtesy that had never left him despite everything. Your daughter brings honor to your family. She heals the sick, teaches the young, stands for justice. You should be proud. Thomas Sullivan studied the Apache warrior who had captured his daughter's heart. She wrote of you in the letters that got through, said you were the most honorable man she'd ever known. Your daughter sees with the heart, Taza replied. She saw good in a young warrior when others saw only an enemy. She sees hope in this place where others see only defeat. Will you marry her? Elizabeth asked suddenly. Properly, I mean, in a church? Maggie and Taza exchanged glances. They considered themselves married already, bound by promises stronger than any ceremony. But perhaps we'll marry in both traditions. Maggie decided. Apache ceremony for his people, Christian for mine. Will you stay for it? Her parents stayed a week, long enough to see their daughter united with Taza in two ceremonies that couldn't have been more different yet somehow perfectly complemented each other. The Apache ritual took place at sunset, with sacred smoke and ancient songs. The couple wrapped in a wedding blanket as they walked around a fire 4 times. The Christian service was simpler. Crawford officiating in his capacity as justice of the peace, with Samuel as witness, and even some soldiers attending. When I grow up, I'll be your wife, Maggie whispered to Taza as they stood before the altar, causing him to smile at the memory. And so you have, he replied. My little prophet spoke true. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Children came, strong, beautiful children who carried both heritages proudly. The eldest, a boy they named Thomas Kuruk, after both their fathers, showed his mother's fierce determination and his father's quiet strength. Their daughter, Maria Ayana, had her father's dark eyes and her mother's quick tongue. The reservation slowly transformed. Young Apache men, led by Taza's example, began engaging with the white world on their own terms. Some became ranchers, others policemen. A few even studied law to fight for their people in courtrooms instead of canyons. The women, inspired by Maggie's school, ensured their children learned both worlds' wisdom. Not everyone approved. Diehards on both sides called them traitors. Apple, red outside, white inside, or worse. But more found hope in this middle path, this proof that Apache and white could build something together without either losing themselves. One day, as Maggie taught a mixed class of Apache and white children, for some settlers had begun sending their children to learn Apache tracking and plant knowledge, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. William Hartley, freed after 5 years in prison, stood there much diminished. The scars had faded, but the arrogance had not. "Come to gloat?" he asked bitterly. "To show me how happy you are with your savage?" "I came to forgive," Maggie said simply. "Hatred is too heavy to carry forever." He stared at her, this woman he'd tried to own, now a respected teacher and healer, mother and leader. Something broke in his face. "I wasted everything," he whispered. "My whole life, pursuing what was never mine to take." "It's not too late to choose a different path," she offered. "There's work here for those willing to help rather than harm." He left without answering, but months later, they heard he'd joined a mission in California, trying to atone for old sins. People could change, given the chance and the choice. As their 10th anniversary approached, Taza surprised Maggie with a journey. Using money saved from his work as a tribal policeman, he arranged for them to visit the mountains where they'd first declared their love. The army had lifted some restrictions, allowing supervised visits to traditional lands. They camped where the old hideout had been, now empty of all but memories. Their children played where warriors once planned raids, and Maggie realized how much had changed, yet how much endured. "Do you regret it?" Taza asked as they watched the sunset paint the peaks purple and gold. "The life you could have had?" "Never," Maggie said firmly. "I found something better than comfort or safety. I found purpose. I found you. I found myself, my fierce one," he murmured, using the endearment that had seen them through so much. "You saved not just me, but all of us. Showed us a way forward when we saw only endings." "We saved each other," she corrected, as she always did. "And we'll keep saving each other, whatever comes." Their children ran to them as stars emerged, full of stories about rabbit tracks and eagle sightings. Maria climbed into Taza's lap while Thomas peppered Maggie with questions about the plants they'd found. This was their legacy. Not just survival, but synthesis. Not just endurance, but hope. The wind sang through the canyons with the same voice it had carried for centuries, whispering of changes past and changes to come. But some things remained constant. The mountain's strength, the star's beauty, and the love between two people who had defied every odd to create their own destiny. As they prepared to return to San Carlos, to their work and their people, Maggie paused for one last look at the wild landscape. Somewhere in these hills, a young Apache warrior had laughed at a white child's impossible promise. That laughter had echoed through years of separation, war, imprisonment, and struggle, only to transform into something deeper, a love that bridged worlds and offered hope that different peoples could indeed become one. "Ready?" Taza asked, their children already mounted and eager to go. "Ready," Maggie confirmed, taking his offered hand to mount her horse. They rode down from the mountains as a family, leaving the past in its place while carrying its lessons forward. Behind them, the peaks stood eternal. Ahead, the future waited. Uncertain as always, but no longer feared, for they would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with courage, with determination, and with the unbreakable bond forged by a child's promise and a warrior's laughter, now fulfilled in ways neither could have imagined on that long-ago night by an Apache fire. The desert stretched before them, vast and challenging, but it was home, and in the end, home was not a place but the people you chose to stand beside, no matter what storms might come. Their story would be told around fires for generations. The tale of Margaret Sullivan and Taza of the Chiricahua, who proved that love could bloom even in the harshest ground, and that promises made in innocence could shape destinies and change worlds. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and courage from the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Just as Maggie and Taza connected across cultures, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that bring the frontier to life. And share your thoughts on this epic romance. Did Maggie and Taza's journey touch your heart as it did mine? Let me know below.